Avoidance. Face shocking emotional fallout after no contact. Let's talk about something that nobody likes to admit, but it's real. You pull away, you run, you build walls so high that even you can't see over them, and you think it's control, you think it's power. But what happens when the silence sets in? When there's no one to text, no one to blame, no one to prove a point to? That's when the truth hits. Hard. Avoidance often feels like control. It feels like power. It's the ability to walk away, to detach, to convince yourself that you don't need anyone. When you're in that mindset, it can seem like you're protecting yourself, like you're the one in control of the situation. But beneath the surface, avoidance isn't about power. It's about fear. It's fear of vulnerability, fear of rejection, fear of experiencing pain that you don't know how to process. The mind is a master at justifying actions. If you spent years avoiding deep emotional connections, you've likely built an internal belief system that supports your actions. I'm just independent. I don't need people to be happy. I function better alone. These are the mantras that play on repeat in the mind of someone who leans on avoidance as a coping mechanism. But when you strip away the rationalizations, what's left? A fear of being truly seen, a fear of being hurt, a fear of exposing the parts of yourself that you don't fully accept. For many, avoidance starts as a survival mechanism. It begins in childhood and relationships where vulnerability wasn't safe. Maybe expressing emotions led to punishment, criticism, or abandonment. Maybe no one was there to comfort you when you needed it most, so you learn to comfort yourself by shutting down. Over time, this becomes an identity. You pride yourself on not needing others, on being self-sufficient, but what started as protection turns into a prison. The problem with avoidance is that it doesn't just keep pain out, it keeps love out, it keeps connection out. It keeps fulfillment out. You may not even realize it at first because the need for connection is buried beneath layers of self-protection. But at some point, life forces you to see the truth. Maybe it happens after a breakup. Maybe it happens when someone walks away from you, and instead of feeling relief, you feel an emptiness you didn't expect. Maybe it happens when you reach a milestone and realize you have no one to share it with. That's when the illusion of control starts to crack. No contact can be a powerful tool for healing, but for avoidance, it often serves a different function. It becomes a way to reinforce the belief that detachment is the answer. When faced with conflict, rejection, or discomfort, the instinct is to cut off, to walk away, to erase. It's easier to shut down than to sit with difficult emotions. It's easier to create a narrative where you're better off alone than to confront the pain of disconnection. But here's the hard truth. Just because something is easier doesn't mean it's right. The fallout from no contact is often delayed for avoidance. Initially, it feels like relief. No more arguments, no more expectations, no more vulnerability. But the mind doesn't erase emotions, it suppresses them. And what is suppressed eventually resurfaces. It might come in the form of sudden regret, unexpected sadness, or an overwhelming sense of loneliness. It might show up in patterns, pushing people away, then longing for them when they're gone, seeking connection, but sabotaging it when it gets too close. This cycle can repeat endlessly unless it's recognized for what it is. Avoidance isn't a strength. It's an unhealed wound disguised as self-sufficiency. It's a coping mechanism that no longer serves you. True strength isn't in walking away. It's in facing the emotions you've spent years running from. It's in choosing to open up even when it's uncomfortable. It's in recognizing that needing people doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Healing doesn't mean forcing yourself into relationships you're not ready for. It means learning to sit with your emotions instead of numbing them. It means challenging the belief that isolation is the answer. It means taking small steps, having an honest conversation, allowing yourself to express vulnerability, acknowledging the fears that drive you to detach. The path to change isn't easy, but it's necessary because the cost of avoidance isn't just missed relationships. It's a life spent running from your own heart. At first, no contact feels like freedom. It feels like a weight has been lifted. There's no more pressure, no more conflict, no more obligations to another person's emotions. If you've spent your life relying on avoidance, this space can feel like a relief. You tell yourself it was the right choice. You tell yourself that you don't need to think about them, that you've moved on, that you're better off. You fill your time with distractions, work, hobbies, friends, anything that keeps you from having to sit alone with your thoughts. And for a while it works. You feel like you've won. You've successfully cut ties, reinforced your independence, and proven to yourself that you don't need anyone. But then something shifts. Maybe it's in a quiet moment when there are no distractions left. Maybe it's a random memory that resurfaces, completely uninvited. Maybe it's a song, a scent, a place that reminds you of them. Suddenly there's an ache you didn't expect, a wave of emotion that catches you off guard. You try to push it away, but the harder you try, the stronger it becomes. The mind that once convinced you that you were fine now starts betraying you with questions you can't ignore. Did I make the right choice? Do I actually miss them? What if I pushed away something that mattered? This is the boomerang effect of no contact, and it hits avoidance harder than they ever expect. At first first, it feels like an inconvenience, something to be dismissed, but the longer the silence stretches, the more it forces you to confront something you've been avoiding your whole life, your own emotions. When you're used to running, when you've built your identity around detachment, this moment can be shocking. You're not supposed to feel this way. You thought you were immune to this kind of longing, this kind of regret. But the truth is, no one is immune to emotional bonds. You can try to sever them, but the imprint remains. Avoidants often assume that because they don't process emotions immediately, they don't feel as deeply as others. But the reality is they often feel even more deeply, just on a delay. The emotions that others process in real time, avoidants suppress, burying them under layers of rationalization. But emotions don't just disappear, they wait. And when they surface, they hit with full force, like a tidal wave that's been building beneath the surface for weeks, months, even years. The most unsettling part of this experience is how unpredictable it is. One moment you find, the next you're questioning everything. It can feel like losing control, like the very detachment you relied on is turned against you. You may find yourself tempted to reach out, not because you genuinely want to reconnect, but because you're desperate to make the feeling stop. But reaching out doesn't fix the core issue. It only prolongs the cycle. Because the real issue isn't the other person. It's the pattern, the habit of running, of shutting down, of convincing yourself that isolation is the answer. Some avoidants react to this emotional fallout with even more avoidance. They double down on their independence, suppress their feelings even further, and convince themselves that it's just a phase. But others recognize it as a wake-up call. They start to see the cost of avoidance, not just in relationships, but in their own emotional well-being. Because no contact doesn't just cut off the other person, it cuts you off from a part of yourself. It forces you to sit with the feelings you've spent a lifetime avoiding. And in those moments, you have a choice. You can keep running, convincing yourself that the pain will eventually fade, that if you just keep moving, you won't have to deal with it. Or you can stop. You can allow yourself to feel what you've been pushing away. You can ask yourself why this pattern keeps repeating, why the relief of avoidance is always followed by the ache of regret. You can start to understand that the solution isn't in escaping emotions, but in facing them. Because the more you face them, the less power they have over you. And when you finally stop running, you open the door to something that avoidance can never give you: real, lasting peace. You think you've moved on, you think you've left the past behind, locked the door, thrown away the key, but then something happens. Maybe it's days later, maybe months. A memory resurfaces, a familiar pain creeps in, and suddenly you realize the wound never fully healed. It was just buried. Suppressing emotions doesn't make them disappear. It just delays their return. And when they do return, they come back stronger, demanding to be acknowledged. The mind is an expert at avoiding discomfort. When something hurts, the instinct is to shut down, distract, move on. But emotions don't work that way. You can silence them for a while, but they remain stored in your nervous system, waiting for a trigger, a conversation, a song, a place, even a certain time of year. Anything can crack open the emotional vault. And when that happens, it's like being hit with a wave you didn't see coming. The pain is raw, fresh, as if no time has passed at all. That's because time alone doesn't heal wounds. Processing them does. Avoidants are especially vulnerable to this kind of emotional whiplash, because avoidance isn't the absence of emotion, it's the suppression of it. Just because you don't react in the moment doesn't mean you aren't affected. In fact, it often means the emotions are building up, waiting for a moment of weakness to surface. And when they do, they don't just whisper, they roar. The longer you suppress, the more intense the fallout. It's easy to mistake this delayed pain for something external. You might tell yourself you're feeling this way because you missed the person, because you made a mistake, because something outside of you is responsible. But the truth is, the pain was always there. It was just masked by distractions, by logic, by the false belief that if you don't acknowledge something, it doesn't exist. But emotions don't need your permission to exist. They live in your body and your subconscious, and they will find a way to be felt, whether you like it or not. Some people spend their whole lives running from this reality. They go from relationship to relationship, job to job, city to city, thinking a fresh start will fix everything, but no matter where they go, the same feelings catch up with them. That's because the problem isn't external. The unhealed wound always bleeds, no matter how much you try to cover it up. Healing doesn't happen through avoidance, it happens through confrontation. You have to look at the pain, sit with it, understand it. That doesn't mean wallowing in it or letting it consume you. It means giving it space, acknowledging that it exists, and working through it instead of running from it. That's the only way the wound truly closes. The hardest part is accepting that avoidance has been a defense mechanism, not a solution. It may have protected you from pain in the short term, but in the long run, it has only kept you stuck. It has made your emotions more unpredictable, your relationships more fragile, and your sense of self more disconnected. Because you cannot selectively numb pain when you shut down one emotion, you shut them all down. That's why avoidants often struggle to feel deep joy, connection, or fulfillment. The walls built to keep out pain also keep out love, peace, and happiness. Breaking the cycle requires courage. It means being willing to sit in discomfort, to feel emotions instead of pushing them away. It means recognizing that no one is immune to emotional pain, no matter how strong or independent they appear to be. It means understanding that vulnerability is not a weakness, it is a necessity for true healing. This isn't about going back to the past or reopening old wounds for the sake of suffering. It's about learning from them so they don't control your future. Because the past doesn't go away just because you ignore it. It lingers, shaping your actions, your choices, your relationships, until you finally decide to face it. And when you do, you'll realize that the pain wasn't the enemy. Avoidance was. Avoidance feels like a solution. It feels like power, like control, like the ability to dictate the terms of your emotional experience. When something becomes uncomfortable, when emotions get too intense, the instinct is to step back, to shut down, to remove yourself from the situation entirely. It seems logical. If something hurts, the best way to stop the pain is to eliminate the source. But what if the real cost isn't in what you've left behind, but in what you've denied yourself? Running feels safe. It keeps you from confronting emotions that make you feel exposed, uncertain, or vulnerable. Over time, this habit of shutting down comes at a price. You might not see it immediately because avoidance works as a temporary numbing agent. It gives the illusion of freedom. You're not dealing with conflict. You're not feeling overwhelmed. You're not engaging in situations that force you to address discomfort. But what happens beneath the surface is something entirely different. Every time you cut off a relationship, suppress an emotion, or choose isolation over connection, you reinforce a pattern. This pattern tells you that distance is the answer, that being self-sufficient is better than being seen, that emotional detachment equals strength. But the longer you live by this belief, the more you begin to realize that something is missing. Maybe it shows up in a restless feeling, in an inability to fully connect with others, in the sensation that no matter how many times you walk away, you never quite find the peace you're looking for. That's because avoidance doesn't actually remove the problem, it just postpones it. The past doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It lingers in your subconscious, shaping the way you interact with the world. It influences your decisions, your relationships, your self-perception. You may think you're leaving the past behind, but in reality, it follows you into every new situation, dictating how you respond to love, intimacy, and trust. It creates a cycle where you repeat the same behaviors, experience the same emotional fallout, and wonder why things always seem to end up the same way. The cost of avoidance is subtle at first. It's missed opportunities for connection, moments where you could have spoken up but didn't, times when you felt lonely but refused to admit it. Over time, the impact grows. Relationships become shallow because you never fully let people in. Joy feels muted because you've trained yourself to avoid deep emotions. Your sense of self becomes tied to this idea that you don't need anyone, that you function best alone, that emotional independence is the only path to safety. But deep down, a part of you knows the truth. This isn't strength, it's fear disguised as control. The irony of avoidance is that it doesn't actually keep you from pain, it creates a different kind of suffering, one that is quieter but just as damaging. It's the ache of disconnection, the weight of loneliness, the feeling that you are an observer in your own life rather than an active participant. It's the realization that while you've protected yourself from rejection and hurt, you've also denied yourself love, trust, and intimacy. The walls you built to keep out pain have also kept out everything that makes life meaningful. Some people go years, even decades, before recognizing this. They assume they're just wired differently, that they don't experience emotions the way others do. But avoidance isn't a personality trait, it's a learned response. It's a defense mechanism that was developed at some point to cope with pain. And like any learned behavior, it can be unlearned. Breaking the cycle of avoidance doesn't mean forcing yourself into relationships or situations you're not ready for. It means making small choices that challenge the belief that isolation is the answer. It means staying present when emotions become uncomfortable instead of shutting down. It means recognizing that feeling deeply isn't a weakness. It's a sign that you are alive. The cost of avoidance is high, but the reward of facing your emotions is even greater. Because once you stop running, you finally give yourself a chance to heal. When you've spent your life avoiding deep emotional connections, detaching feels natural, it feels safe, it feels like control. You tell yourself that you're better off not getting too close, that independence is your strength, that needing others is a weakness. And for a while, this mindset works. It shields you from pain, from disappointment, from the unpredictability of human relationships. But what happens when you take this approach too far? What happens when you remove yourself from connection so completely that you start to feel numb? At first, no contact feels like an escape. There's relief in the silence, in the distance, in the absence of emotional demands. You convince yourself that you're fine, that the situation didn't affect you, that moving on is just a matter of keeping busy and focusing on yourself. But avoidance doesn't erase emotions, it only buries them. And the deeper you bury something, the more pressure it builds over time. What you don't process today will resurface tomorrow, next month, or years from now in unexpected ways. The emotional fallout for avoidance after no contact is different from what most people expect. It doesn't come in immediate waves of grief or sadness. Instead, it creeps in slowly, quietly. It shows up as restlessness, as an inability to fully enjoy the things that once brought you happiness. It manifests as a subtle emptiness, a sense that something is missing, but you can't quite put your finger on what. You might start noticing patterns, pushing people away, feeling indifferent to relationships, struggling to maintain deep connections. Over time, this detachment begins to feel less like freedom and more like isolation. The body and mind are not designed for prolonged emotional suppression. Human beings are wired for connection, whether they like to admit it or not. When that connection is consistently severed, when you repeatedly choose distance over vulnerability, silence over expression, withdrawal over engagement, it creates a disconnect within yourself. You start feeling out of sync, as if you're moving through life without fully experiencing it. The highs aren't as high, the joys aren't as joyful, and even the pain becomes dull, numbed by the very defense mechanism that was meant to protect you. One of the most deceptive things about avoidance is that it tricks you into believing you're at peace when in reality, you've just disconnected from your emotions. True peace comes from resolving emotions, not repressing them. When you avoid, you don't get rid of your feelings, you just silence them temporarily. And that silence can feel like relief at first, but over time it turns into an internal void. That void may not be obvious in your day-to-day life. You might function perfectly fine on the surface, working, socializing, even engaging in casual relationships. But deep down, there's a distance, a sense of being removed from your own experiences. You're there, but not fully present. You're involved, but not fully invested. You're living, but not fully alive. The longer this pattern continues, the more the emotional cost adds up. You might find yourself feeling disconnected from friends and family, unable to form new meaningful relationships, or struggling to maintain the ones you have. The idea of vulnerability might feel overwhelming, even foreign. You might notice that you avoid deep conversations, that you shut down when people try to get too close, that you find reasons to walk away before someone else has the chance to leave you first. This emotional numbing isn't accidental. It's a defense mechanism that was built over time, often in response to past pain, rejection, or abandonment. At some point, avoiding emotions felt safer than facing them. But just because something feels safe doesn't mean it's healthy. Emotional detachment might protect you from pain, but it also robs you of connection, of intimacy, of the full experience of being human. Healing from this pattern starts with awareness. It starts with recognizing that no contact didn't just remove the person from your life, it removed you from a part of yourself. It starts with acknowledging that shutting down isn't strength, that avoiding emotions isn't control, and that running from discomfort only prolongs suffering. The path forward isn't about forcing yourself to feel everything at once, but about slowly allowing yourself to reconnect to your emotions, to your experiences, and to the people who truly matter. Because in the end, detachment doesn't create freedom, it creates emptiness. And the only way to truly heal is to face what you've been avoiding all along. Avoidants often believe that emotional detachment shields them from pain. They convince themselves that if they don't get too attached, if they don't invest too deeply, if they don't allow themselves to feel too much, then they can avoid the kind of suffering that others go through. They see themselves as independent, self-sufficient, and in control. But what they don't realize is that avoidance doesn't eliminate pain, it simply postpones it. And when it does surface, it often does so in ways they never expected. When an avoidant goes no contact, they initially feel relief. The pressure is gone, the emotional demands have disappeared, and they feel like they've successfully removed themselves from the situation. But emotions don't work that way. So they don't disappear just because you refuse to acknowledge them. Instead, they remain beneath the surface, waiting for a moment of vulnerability to break through. And when that moment comes, the emotions hit like a tidal wave. For some avoidants, this emotional fallout appears as regret. At first, they may feel confident in their decision to cut ties, but as time goes on, they start to question whether they made the right choice. The absence of the person they pushed away starts to feel more noticeable. The silence that once felt like peace starts to feel like loneliness. They find themselves revisiting old memories, replaying conversations, and wondering if they misjudged the situation. This regret doesn't come all at once. It sneaks up gradually in quiet moments when they least expect it. For others, the impact of avoidance manifests in a more physical way. Emotional suppression doesn't just affect the mind, it affects the body as well. Stress, anxiety, tension, and even physical exhaustion can result from unresolved emotions. The body stores emotional pain, and when it isn't processed, it often emerges through restlessness, sleep disturbances, or a general feeling of unease. The avoidant may not consciously connect these symptoms to their emotional choices, but deep down, their mind and body know what they are running from. One of the most deceptive aspects of avoidance is that it creates a false sense of control. The avoidant believes that by shutting down their emotions, they are protecting themselves from hurt, but in reality, they are only making themselves more vulnerable to emotional distress in the long run. The pain doesn't go away, it just builds. And when it finally surfaces, it does so without warning, leaving them feeling overwhelmed and unprepared. The irony is that while avoidants spend so much time trying to protect themselves from pain, their very coping mechanism is what creates the most suffering. By refusing to engage with their emotions, they create a cycle of isolation, disconnection, and internal conflict. They may struggle with relationships, feeling distant from others even when surrounded by people. They may find it difficult to trust, to be vulnerable, or to express their true feelings. And over time, this emotional detachment starts to take a toll, not just on their relationships, but on their overall sense of fulfillment and purpose. The only way to break this cycle is to acknowledge what has been ignored. This doesn't mean drowning in emotions all at once or forcing oneself to feel things they aren't ready to face. It means taking small steps towards self-awareness, recognizing patterns of avoidance, and allowing emotions to surface without fear. It means understanding that pain is not the enemy, avoidance is. Because in the end, the emotions that go unprocessed don't disappear, they wait, and they will continue to wait until they are finally faced. Healing doesn't happen in the absence of pain, it happens through it. Many avoidants believe that by cutting off emotions, by distancing themselves from relationships, and by keeping their feelings at bay, they are protecting themselves from suffering. But true healing is not found in avoidance. It is found in learning to navigate the very emotions they have spent so much time suppressing. It requires the courage to sit with discomfort, to confront unresolved wounds, and to allow emotions to flow rather than shutting them down. At first, facing emotions can feel overwhelming. Avoidants are used to pushing things away, numbing themselves, or distracting their minds with work, entertainment, or surface-level interactions. They have spent years training themselves to believe that emotions are inconvenient, unnecessary, or even dangerous. But the reality is that emotions are simply signals. They are not there to break you, they are there to guide you. Pain is not an enemy, it is a message, a teacher, a sign that something needs attention. And ignoring that message doesn't make it go away, it only makes it louder over time. The first step toward true healing is acceptance. Avoidants must recognize that they are not emotionless. They have simply conditioned themselves to disconnect. They must acknowledge that running from emotions has not truly brought them peace. Instead, it has created an underlying sense of emptiness, a feeling that something is missing even when everything appears fine on the surface. Healing begins the moment they stop resisting what they feel and start making space for it. Processing emotions is not about drowning in them. It is about creating a space where they can be understood rather than feared. It is about learning to experience sadness without seeing it as a weakness, to feel anger without suppressing it, and to acknowledge love without fearing dependency. Emotions are not something to be controlled or eliminated, they are part of being human. And when avoidants begin to accept this, they slowly start to reconnect with themselves. This process is not linear. Some days will feel easier than others. There will be moments of progress and moments of retreat. But healing is not about perfection, it is about persistence. It is about choosing again and again to stay present rather than shutting down. It is about recognizing when old patterns of avoidance start to surface and making a conscious effort to respond differently. Instead of withdrawing, they practice expressing. Instead of numbing, they practice feeling. Instead of running, they practice staying. One of the biggest shifts that occurs during this journey is the realization that vulnerability is not weakness. Many avoidants have spent their lives associating vulnerability with loss of control, with risk, with the possibility of getting hurt. But in reality, vulnerability is what allows true connection to happen, not just with others, but with themselves. When they allow themselves to be open, to acknowledge what they feel, and to express it without shame, they begin to experience a depth of connection they never thought possible. Healing also requires patience. Years of emotional suppression cannot be undone overnight. It takes time to unlearn old habits, to rebuild trust in oneself and in others, and to develop the resilience to face emotions rather than escape them. But every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory. Every moment of self-awareness, every act of emotional honesty, and every instance of choosing connection over avoidance is a sign of growth. Ultimately, true healing for avoidants comes when they realize that emotions are not something to be feared but embraced, that connection is not a burden but a gift, that facing their feelings does not make them weak but makes them whole. And when they finally stop running, they discover that what they were searching for was never in the distance. It was within them all along. At the end of the day, avoidance may feel like protection, but it is really a prison. Keeps you from pain, yes, but it also keeps you from joy, from love, from the full experience of being human. It convinces you that distance equals freedom, when in reality it is connection that sets you free. The shocking emotional fallout after no contact isn't just about missing someone. It's about missing a part of yourself that you've spent years shutting down. But here's the truth. You are not broken. You are not incapable of connection. You are not destined to be stuck in a cycle of avoidance forever. Healing is possible, but it requires courage. The courage to sit with discomfort, to acknowledge your emotions rather than suppress them, and to let go of the belief that avoidance is the answer. The real strength isn't in shutting down. It's in staying open. It's in feeling everything, even when it's hard. It's in trusting that you are strong enough to handle whatever emotions arise. No one heals overnight. This is a journey, one that requires patience, self-compassion, and a willingness to break old patterns. But every step forward, no matter how small, is a step toward freedom. And in that freedom, you will find something greater than avoidance could ever offer. A life that is rich, meaningful, and deeply connected. Thank you for being here, for listening, for opening your heart even in the smallest way. If something in this message resonated with you, take it with you. Apply it. Let it challenge you. Let it inspire you. And most importantly, let it remind you that you are capable of healing, of change, and of a life that is no longer controlled by fear. I appreciate you, and I believe in you. Thank you.